April 24, 1944, somewhere over Germany, in the frozen night sky, 5,500 meters above the ground, a young airman sat trapped inside a blazing aircraft. He could smell smoke. He could feel the heat crawling along the fuselage. And in that instant, staring into the inferno that had once been his bomber, he realized he had only two options: burn to death or jump. This is the true story of Sergeant Nicholas Stephen Alcamaide, the British airman who fell from the heavens without a parachute and survived to tell the tale, high above the skies of Europe. By early 1944, the air war had reached its cruelest rhythm. Every night, hundreds of bombers lifted off from the quiet airfields of England, heavy, slow, and glinting like dark shadows beneath the moonlight. Their destination, the heart of Nazi Germany. Their mission, to dismantle the Third Reich's war machine, one city at a time. It was a relentless campaign known as the Battle of Berlin. For the men of the Royal Air Force Bomber Command, the odds of survival were terrifying: 1 in 3 would never return home. Yet they climbed into their aircraft night after night because someone had to. Among them was 21-year-old Nicholas Stephen Alcamaide from Norfolk, tail gunner aboard an Avro Lancaster of No. 115 Squadron based at Wychford. To be a tail gunner was to live in a glass bubble at the edge of life. Your position was isolated at the rear of the plane, exposed, cramped, and freezing. In that small transparent dome, you were the first to see death approaching from behind and the last to know whether you would ever return home. Mission, Berlin. On the night of March 24, 1944, 577 Lancaster and 231 Halifax bombers ascended into the dark skies over England. Their target was Berlin, but a wall of inclement weather pushed much of the formation off course, straight into the Ruhr Valley, the most heavily defended area in all of Germany. To the Germans, the Ruhr was sacred, the beating industrial heart of their war effort. To the British crews, it was a nightmare, thick with flak batteries and prowling night fighters. Inside Lancaster DS-64, Alcamaide's crew knew what that meant: hell awaited. The pilot, Flight Sergeant Newman, kept the aircraft steady as bursts of anti-aircraft fire lit the sky with orange streaks. Tracer rounds whipped past the wings like fiery comets. The bombers shuddered, engines howling, yet they pressed on. Each of the 7 crew members performed his duty with mechanical precision. The navigator checked the stars. The bomb aimer adjusted the sights. The wireless operator relayed signals. And in the back, Alcamaide, alone in his turret, scanned the darkness for the flicker of an enemy approach. He could see no one else, only their voices crackling through the intercom, faint, metallic, human. And then, over the radio, came the words every airman dreaded: enemy aircraft sighted. Attack from the night. A Junkers Ju-88 night fighter had locked onto their tail, guided by the ghostly pulse of radar. It climbed silently from below, then its cannons erupted, ripping into the Lancaster's belly. In seconds, fire spread through the fuselage, roaring, unstoppable. Flames licked the oxygen bottles, turning the interior into a furnace. The plexiglass of Alcamaide's turret melted, dripping like wax. He tried to spin and reach his parachute, but it was stowed outside the turret, behind a wall of flames. The intercom screamed, "Abandon aircraft! Abandon aircraft!" Smoke filled his lungs. The heat was unbearable. Through the blaze, he could see one of the wings disintegrating, the horizon spinning wildly. He reached for his parachute again. It was gone. His skin blistered, his eyes watered. And so, Sergeant Nicholas Alcamaide, trapped in a burning bomber 5,500 meters above Germany, made a choice that defied reason. He opened the rear hatch and plunged into the night, a fall through fire and sky. The moment Alcamaide leapt from the bomber, the world exploded into silence. The thunder of engines vanished. The scream of metal was gone. All that remained was the cold rush of air and the beating of his heart. He was falling faster and faster. Through the darkness. 5,000 m above the earth. No parachute. No hope. Only the night sky and the faint orange glow of his burning aircraft disappearing above him. At first, he didn't even feel fear. The shock was too great. The fire that had seared his skin moments before was replaced by freezing wind that cut like knives. He tumbled head over heels, spinning uncontrollably, his arms flailing against the invisible ocean of air. Somewhere between panic and peace, his mind began to drift. Below him, the clouds glowed faintly, the reflection of burning cities, of searchlights piercing the mist, of tracer fire still crisscrossing the heavens. He thought, so this is it. This is how it ends. Then everything went black. The miracle landing. When he opened his eyes, he wasn't in heaven. He was lying in snow. For a long moment, he couldn't understand where he was. Above him, pine branches swayed gently, blocking the moonlight. The smell of smoke still clung to his uniform, but there was no fire, no pain, no death. He moved his fingers, then his legs. Everything hurt, but nothing was broken. Slowly, reality began to return, and with it, disbelief. He had fallen more than 18,000 feet, and survived. Around him stretched a quiet forest. Somewhere in central Germany. The snow was deep, soft, several feet thick, and above him, the broken branches of tall pines told the story of what had just happened. They had acted as a natural break, slowing his descent just enough to spare his life. Combined with the thick snow drift below, the impact had been spread across seconds instead of milliseconds. It was physics, barely. It was luck. Absolutely. He tried to stand but collapsed. His knee throbbed in pain, likely sprained. His back ached, his hands were burned, and the cold gnawed at his open skin. Still, he was alive. Somewhere in the distance, dogs barked. German voices echoed faintly between the trees. He knew he had to make a decision. Fast. Hide or signal for help. He chose the latter. Reaching into his pocket, he found his RAF emergency whistle, the same one every crewman carried for rescue at sea. He blew it. A long, sharp note that cut through the frozen air. Minutes later, a lantern appeared among the trees. Then two. Then three. German farmers, armed and cautious, stepped closer, astonished to find a young British airman sitting calmly in the snow, his parachute nowhere to be seen. The interrogation. By morning, Alchemaid was taken into custody. The Gestapo officers who interrogated him were skeptical, to put it mildly. When he told them he had fallen without a parachute, they laughed. One of them said, "Impossible. You think we are fools?" But Alchemaid stuck to his story. He described every detail. The attack, the fire, the jump, the snow, the forest. He even pointed out the direction where his aircraft must have crashed. A few days later, the Germans went to investigate. And there, amid the wreckage of Lancaster DS-664, they found something remarkable. The charred remains of Alchemaid's parachute harness still attached inside the burned fuselage. The buckles matched his. The straps were fused into the metal by fire. He had been telling the truth. When the report returned, the Gestapo officers looked at him differently. They drafted a formal certificate stamped and signed verifying that Sergeant Nicholas Stephen Alamade RAF survived a fall from approximately 18,000 feet without a parachute. Even his captors were impressed. One German officer reportedly told him almost respectfully, "You are a very lucky man, Sergeant." From that day on, he was treated not as a criminal, but as a curiosity. The man who fell from the sky and lived life as a prisoner. Stalag 3. After his injuries healed, Alcamade was sent to Stalag Luft 3, the same prison camp that had just weeks earlier witnessed the legendary Great Escape. There he joined hundreds of Allied airmen shot down, captured, and waiting for the war's uncertain end. Inside the camp, word of his survival spread like wildfire. Men who had faced death daily gathered around him, eager to hear the story from his own lips. How high were you? Did you black out? Did you see anything? They asked again and again, half in awe, half in disbelief. Alcamade answered patiently. He spoke not like a hero, but like someone still trying to understand his own existence. He would often say quietly, "I suppose it just wasn't my time." Despite the hunger, the cold, and the monotony of captivity, his presence gave hope. If a man could fall from the sky and survive, maybe anything was possible. He spent the final months of the war in that camp, making friends, trading stories, and waiting for liberation. And when Allied troops finally reached Stalag Luft 3 in 1945, Sergeant Almade walked free. A living miracle. Post-war reflections. The man who fell from heaven. When the war finally ended, millions of men returned home carrying memories too heavy to share. Nicholas Stephen Alamade was one of them. But unlike most, his story didn't fade into the noise of post-war life. It was simply too extraordinary to forget. Back in England, newspapers caught wind of the account verified by the Germans. A British airman who had fallen from 18,000 feet without a parachute and survived. At first, editors doubted it. Then they saw the documents, the Gestapo certificate, the crash report, and the testimonies of his fellow crewmen. Soon, headlines across Britain read, "The man who fell from the sky and lived." To the public, it sounded like divine intervention. To scientists, it was a case worth studying. The physics of survival. A group of RAF medical officers and aeronautical engineers began to analyze what might have happened that night. Their conclusion: survival was improbable, but not impossible. Several factors had aligned in Alcamade's favor. Aerodynamic resistance. As he tumbled through the air, his limbs likely spread out unconsciously, slowing his descent slightly. The forest canopy. The tops of the pine trees broke his fall in stages, dissipating the kinetic energy gradually rather than instantly. Deep snow cover. The winter ground was buried under a thick blanket of snow, which absorbed the impact like a natural cushion. Body orientation. Evidence suggested he may have landed feet first, the position least likely to cause fatal injury. Put together, these small chances had created a miracle of physics. In numerical terms, his effective impact speed might have been reduced from 200 km/h to less than 100, still deadly in most cases, but survivable under the perfect conditions. It wasn't divine intervention perhaps, but it was a breathtaking alignment of nature and luck. A quiet life after the storm. For Alchemade, fame was fleeting. He didn't chase it. He didn't write a book or tour the world. He simply went back to ordinary life, working in factories. Later as a chemical plant operator in Loughborough. Colleagues knew him as kind, calm, and unassuming, a man who smiled often, but rarely spoke of the war. Only close friends ever heard the full story. Usually over a quiet drink. He would tell it without exaggeration, ending with a small shrug. I just did what I had to do. The RAF Museum in Wychford later displayed his emergency whistle. The very one that saved his life that night. Next to it hung a faded copy of the Gestapo's survival certificate, a haunting reminder that even in the darkest corners of war, humanity sometimes recognized wonder instead of hate. Visitors would often stop and stare. Some smiled in disbelief, others left silent, unsure whether to call it luck, fate, or something in between. The meaning of a miracle. In time, historians began to view his case not as an isolated curiosity, but as a symbol, a moment that transcended the brutality of war. It showed that amidst destruction, there could still be awe. That within chaos, there could still be mercy. For the German officers who confirmed his story, it had been a rare act of respect between enemies. For the British public, it became a story of courage, composure, and unimaginable survival. And for Alchemade himself, it was simply proof of life. Proof that even when everything burns around you, there is still a chance, however small, to survive. He once said in an interview years later, I wasn't frightened when I jumped. I'd accepted death. It's only afterward you realize how much you want to live. Those words captured the essence of his experience. A moment when fear, fate, and physics collided in midair. The legacy of Nicholas Stephen Alchemade. As the years rolled by, World War II became history. The battlefields turned to farmland, the ruins to cities once more. But the stories, though small, fragile human stories, remained. And among them, few shone as strangely and beautifully as the story of the man who fell from the sky. Nicholas Stephen Alchemade never called himself a hero. He said the real heroes were the ones who didn't come back. Yet his survival became a quiet testament to something beyond bravery, a moment of grace inside the machinery of war. In 1987, he passed away peacefully at the age of 64. No grand speeches, no ceremonies, just a man who had once looked death in the eye and lived. But even in death, his story refused to vanish. Visitors to the Wychford RAF Museum still stop by his small display. A whistle, a photograph, a document written in German confirming the impossible. Children press their faces to the glass. Veterans stand silently, lost in thought. And somewhere in that stillness, you can almost hear the wind rushing through the pine trees of Germany. The same wind that carried him down to earth. Reflection. between death and survival. When you think of war, you think of death. You think of loss, of fire, of men who never came home. But sometimes, hidden in the smoke and chaos, you find stories that defy every law we know. Stories that whisper that life somehow finds a way. Alchemade's fall wasn't just a miracle of luck or physics. It was a reminder of the fragility of every moment we live, of how thin the line truly is between existence and oblivion. He jumped not because he wanted to survive, but because he refused to burn. And in that refusal, he found life waiting for him on the other side. Humanity amid the war. It is easy to forget that in 1944, mercy was rare. The world was awash in blood and vengeance. And yet, when the Gestapo verified his account, they did not ridicule it. They respected it. They awarded him a certificate, not a bullet. That simple gesture of recognition, one enemy acknowledging the miracle of another, speaks louder than any weapon ever could. It reminds us that even in humanity's darkest hour, the light never completely fades. The final reflection: in the end, the story of Nicholas Stephen Alchemade is not about luck. It is about defiance. It is about the moment a man confronted certain death and met it with calm, with dignity, with something greater than fear. Every time his story is recounted, it reverberates through history's cold corridors like a quiet heartbeat, a whisper declaring that even when everything crumbles, we still have a choice: to surrender, or to leap and trust that somehow, somewhere below, life may be waiting.